everybody. I hope that your holiday season is off to a great start. As I'm recording this, we're about 1 week away from Christmas. About a year ago, some of you will remember, I did a video called A Storm is Rising from the East. And it had to do with China taking an extremely authoritarian bent in the face of pandemic and, well, the global slowdown triggered by the instantaneous reduction in demand that occurred as the pandemic led to shutdowns in the Western world. And then when the shutdowns were over, a radical regearing and over-ordering of goods, and goods piled up around ports and on ships, and retailers here ended up being choked with the incredible amount of goods that were coming in at the same time that inflation was impacting purchasing power. And in my opinion, it led to a situation where China, because of its large population and because it had been on a golden path for really basically the last 30 years of upward triumph of markets and economic expansion, ripple effects of wealth creation. We're lifting many people out of poverty, 1.3 billion people, some good measure of them out of poverty. Well, you have to understand that China doesn't have the safety nets that we have built in, which aren't really safety nets, but we'll get to that with another video in the future. And let me just take a second here and say, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe, hit the bell for all notifications, because, well, why should you listen to me? Well, number one, I spent 5 years working in China. Number two, speak fluent Chinese. And number three, I've always been a student of macroeconomic events, huge events that drive money flows worldwide. I was on the leading edge of analysis of Bitcoin and the problems coming up with Bitcoin, and we saw what happened there. The problems coming up with the stock market and the NASDAQ. I mean, consider this, people willingly give Kathy Wood billions of dollars to invest, and look at what she has done with ARK Innovative Fund, the flagship fund, which peaked at $148 a share and is now $32, which means anytime you invested with her over the last 5 years, you're underwater, you're losing money. Okay, so this is someone who's fabulously paid millions of dollars to effectively lose your money and make up excuses and blame the Fed and things like that. The problem with analysis like that is it doesn't look far enough afield. It doesn't take into account factors of dollar and interest rates and the important things that drive international money flows. And I suspect that we're coming up to a critical one right now. The NASDAQ, the technology index, can't seem to get out of its own way. San Francisco has now been declared the loneliest downtown in America because, well, the young people are being laid off in droves now in Tech Alley and all down in Apples and Googles and Facebooks and now Tesla. It's a changing world out there, okay? And it's a world that I liken it to when the Titanic hit an iceberg in April of 1912. It took a long time, relatively speaking, 10, 15 minutes till the crew realized what peril the ship was in after it struck an iceberg. And, well, the partying continued on deck while an iceberg ripped a huge gash along the side of the hull, eventually resulting in the total loss of the ship. Well, because things don't immediately drop in people's laps here, because they don't immediately see the iceberg and see the gash that's in the side of the economy, they assume that everything is okay. But what really in effect happened when the pandemic struck and we decided, unlike in 1918 when we were at war and there was no chance of shutting down the economy because of the war effort, and in fact because of the Alien and Sedition Act, You risked being imprisoned if you said anything that imperiled the war effort at that time, demoralized people, or led people to believe that there's the slightest chance that the Allies might lose the war. Well, you were faced with potential imprisonment. That meant no matter what, people masked up, in some cases, and went to work, and, well, a lot of people died. But one thing that didn't happen was the economy did not shut down. It continued moving ahead at full bore. We had a totally different scenario here, and a scenario where public health concerns trumped the traditional realities of dealing with epidemics and pandemics, which was let things run their course over time until such time as we achieve what's called herd immunity, and things like viruses lose their hosts and their ability to multiply, and they eventually burn out and go by the wayside. But because in this health emergency we chose to shut down during the pandemic, and on top of that, we had rent forbearance in many places around the nation that people could suspend paying rent. We had the $600 payroll enhancements if you were home, $600 a week extra. You had the Paycheck Protection Program, which went to businesses, and they were supposed to use that money to retain employees during the downtime. Okay? Who knows how that worked? They find out now that there's tens and hundreds of billions of dollars of fraud within that program. But the problem was a lot of unearned money was injected into the economy at that point. Many people saw more money in a month that they had ever seen in their lives and got their hands on, and they spent accordingly. Put that money aside, and they spent for everything that they, from cars to new TVs to every consumer good imaginable. And the signal went out to places like China and also in the United States and other manufacturing countries that demand is unprecedented. Because, well, people had this huge bulge of purchasing power. Of course it was unprecedented, right? Absolutely. People never had so much money in their hands, right? They weren't living paycheck to paycheck. They were living high on the hog suddenly. Some of them didn't have to pay rent. They had the paycheck, living good. The result of all this was a huge signal was sent in of demand that led to a dramatic overproduction of goods that ended up first being bulged at factory gates, then being bulged on ships parked offshore of the United States. And other ports are backed up working 24/7, almost to the point of breakdown. Railroads, trucking companies were just almost at the breaking point. We need to remember that those points in history are really rare and few and far between that the system is taxed so much. Well, in a lot of places where people were purchasing managers and ordering for everything from department stores to hardware stores to big box stores to super high-end stores, the message went out that we can't get enough of this stuff. And we ended up with aisles in stores just clogged and choked with boxes and overabundance of crap that, well, nobody wants to buy. And as a result, companies like Amazon, Walmart, they're scaling down now their forecasts. At the same time, their costs have risen because of all this money that was injected into the economy. Created a huge bulge of inflation. And as a result of that, it appeared that interest rates on the short term end were going up because, well, inflation was bad. And this is where you really need to follow this. And you need to be a part of this channel going forward. I encourage you to subscribe and hit the bell. It's not often I do an upload. I'm not a person that feels compelled every day to talk about economics and investing unless I think I have something to say. All right? I'm not going to waste your time, in other words. I'm going to do frivolous fun stuff on the channel, travel, etc. But we're now coming to a point where we have seen a rise of interest rates on the 10-year United States 10-year Treasury note from about 0.7% to 4.5%. Now we've backed off to 3.5%. Because it appears that the economy is visibly slowing. But when we look at the short-term rates, the 3-month, 6-month T-bill rates, as you see in this chart, we see that the Fed funds rate, which is the blue line, you may not be able to see it, but it ends at the lower point below the 6-month and the 3-month federal Treasury bill rates. The Fed has been following interest rates. It has not been leading them. Despite what people like Elizabeth Warren say that the Fed is a disaster and they should stop raising interest rates, they can't. If they try to stop raising interest rates, banks can borrow the cheap money from the Fed. They can turn around, take the money and put it into a 3-month T-bill and earn a difference between their borrowing cost and what they're going to get on the T-bill, and risk-free money in the pocket. Try doing that with about $10-50 billion, and you'll clear about $100 million, right? You can't let that happen. Those arbitrage opportunities can't be allowed. So the Fed has to keep its interest rates close to what the marketplace is setting. Not the Fed, what the marketplace is setting. At this point in time, we have a U.S. dollar that's now beginning to turn. Looks like it's maybe peaked and turning downward. We have gold and silver, which look like they've got a little bit of heat underneath of them. Right. And we're coming to a situation where this has really got to key in on this, where people think because we're slowing down, interest rates are going to be dropping dramatically back to where they were when the pandemic was at its worst and we had 0.75% interest rates, mortgage rates were giveaway and things like that, okay? But the problem is this long decline of interest rates over 42 years has led to a situation, because money got cheaper to get, interest rates got cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. The cost of borrowing went down and down and down, and the cost of servicing went down, and less interest to pay, less interest to pay. So the United States government can go on a huge borrowing spree over 42 years and explode the amount of debt that it holds. Corporations can explode the amount of debt that they have because, well, it's cheap to service. But now we come to a point where debt begins to have to be rolled over, and it's meeting the new realities of interest rates that are higher. No more 0.15% 3-month T-bill rate. No more of that. Okay, that's long gone. Now you're looking at about 4%, much more expensive, and the results are dramatic in terms of expectation of what it's going to cost in the budget in the future to service this amount of debt. My point is, normally, if we didn't have this amount of debt that we were carrying worldwide in every major economy, from China to the United States to India to everywhere, Japan, if we really go down into a slowing period of time, we would naturally expect that rates would drop dramatically, because the demand for money would go down by private borrowers, can't afford houses, corporations are scared, they don't want to expand plant capacity, retailers don't want to put up new stores, restaurateurs don't want to open. Things slow down. Normally that would drive the cost of money down. But I would tell you, because we have so much aggregate debt in the world now, I can't guarantee that rates will go down at this point in time. What I think might happen is that as risk rises in the system and we do slow down, because people's purchasing power has been so impaired by inflation and wages have yet to really catch up there, that we're in almost a strike mentality now, and it's back and forth and fighting about wages and prices, this hamster wheel. There's no such assurance in the face of all this mountain of debt that eventually borrowing, suppose the government had to turn around again and stimulate the economy and issue trillions of dollars of additional stimulus. You might say to yourself, my God, any more stimulus, we're going to be in a poorhouse because of inflation. Exactly. And this is the point I'm making to you is, I would not be so sanguine and so sure that interest rates are going to go down in the future. In fact, given the mountains of debt and the rising risk in the system of economic failure, whether in China, the United States, Middle East, Africa, South America, whatever, the rising tide of debt will really be forcing more and more borrowed dollars into the government hands and choking out the private sector. So beware. So what does it mean in that sort of environment for investing? Well, we know that rising interest rates are the one and only true enemy of rising equity prices, right? Stocks hate when interest rates go up because interest rate investments, banks, CDs, money markets, treasury bills, treasury notes, they provide competition for the dollar. Well, maybe I'll put my money in a bank account for 6 months or a year. You know, maybe I'll pull it out of stocks. It looks really high. Things are pricey. Right? People start to make these decisions millions of times when it comes to managing their own money. The alternatives of other places to get a return on their money. The stock market is no longer the only game in town. And further on, we see that we have been oversaturated with technology to the point that technology companies are bleeding left, right, and center. And what's being lost in this nation, what's not being reflected in the labor statistics, is the quality of jobs that are being lost are in the $100,000 a year plus range. Okay, they're not being lost at the right at the retail level. A McDonald's cleric counter worker, a worker at a Walmart. No. These are the really high-paying jobs that are at the heart of driving the economy. So what do we need to keep an eye on in the future? We need to see that if the stock market weakens, we would normally expect to see interest rates go down a lot. But if they seem to be sticky and they're holding and they actually, God forbid, start to look like they're rising, then I would say that we are on the flight of disaster coming up, because we don't know how the plane will fly in that situation. Okay, we do know that to keep things calm on the street level, that the United States government will put some form of money in people's hands when it slows down, but we just are on that inflationary hamster wheel that sinisterly and quietly reduces people's standards of living without, well, robbing them at gunpoint. This has been a lot to digest today, I know. If you've been with me over the years, you know that I'm usually pretty much ahead when it comes to sussing out the things that are coming. And I tell you, keep an eye on the dollar, keep an eye on interest rates. Those are really the two keys for where we're going in the future. And obviously, if risk rises in marginal companies and their cost to borrow, banks say, oh no, we can't, we need 9% interest from you now, not 6%. You're more of a credit risk now. We can see credit costs exploding upward here. We just have to keep an eye on it. All right. I want to thank you today for watching. Your thumbs up or appreciate your comments are welcome down below. And once again, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Hit the bell for all notifications. It is great to have you along. Thanks, everybody.